The focus of this first Lesson 3 video is on knowing when to use what types of graphical information. Certain visuals should be chosen to do certain work. That doesn't mean you can't break the rules when it's aesthetically or technically appropriate to do so, but understanding the rules or conventions is pretty important, so that's where we're going to begin. In the chapter we read for this week, Mike Markell shared 5 key principles for us. A graphic should serve a purpose, a graphic should be simple and uncluttered, a graphic should present a manageable amount of information, a graphic should meet readers' format and use expectations, and a graphic should be clearly labeled. Markell also draws upon some of the rhetorical principles we've discussed, such as audience and context, to situate his recommendations. Before we talk about conventions and best practices, I want to share 2 examples. First, there's this. Imagine this photograph, or a photograph like it, included in instructions for at-home hair coloring. Why might this not work well? We typically see instructions presented with less detail, and often in representational drawings. The reason for this is that people connect to and with photographs, and a photograph is going to convey a high level of detail, a specific person. If the users of the instructions don't or can't connect visually with the person in a photograph, they're distanced from the product or the procedure. Obviously, some of this is subconscious, but it's an important consideration. And there are some levels of distraction in the photograph here. Her blouse, the shower curtain. What does this visual mean? No dogs, no German Shepherds, no German Shepherds named Lucky. This visual was included in a set of use guidelines for an electric blanket, and the guidelines was a numbered list, and item number 17 read, "Do not use with pets." What might be a better visual representation of do not use with pets? Perhaps an image like this, which conveys the concept of different types of animals and retains the do not message by keeping the red circle with a slash through it. Okay, let's pan out a bit and talk about general considerations for creating and using different types of graphics. Our guiding principles are, of course, considerations like audience, purpose, and context. Who is a graphic for? Who will be interpreting and using it? What is their purpose? What do they need to know? What information has to be at the forefront? Context is also crucial. How will users or readers experience the graphic? Markell talks a bit about the effective use of color, for instance, and I can't count how many times I've been in a meeting where someone distributes a document with clearly, carefully crafted information-dense data displays in it, but often the creator designed the data displays on screen. When making copies for the meeting, the data displays became black and white, and often the information is totally obscured and the legend or key is broken. Here's one example. If I look at this MSU Stadium chart in full color, it makes sense. If I print a copy on my black and white printer, I can still identify some information, but I lose the effectiveness of the graphic. And a second example, the data display on the right relies on color to help convey the information. In black and white, we lose that information. Shape here is also used as a secondary way of conveying info, but my eyes have to work a lot harder in the grayscale version to associate the data lines to the labels. We might also break out context a bit further and think about first physical context, where and how users will access the information, attitudinal context, what frame of mind they might be in, and how that might shape their understandings and use context. And along with the rhetorical considerations, of course, we always want to keep in mind the basic design principles: contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. For the rest of this video, we're going to hone in specifically on data displays, which will frame an activity we're going to do this week. First, let's start with some basic anatomy. You'll hear and see these terms when you're building data displays in Word or Excel, so it's important to have a sense of what's being referred to. Here's a sample chart. There are 2 axes, the y-axis, typically the value axis, and the x-axis, typically the category axis. Depending on what type of data display you're creating and how it highlights information, you might have data points or trend lines or plots. One of the most important considerations for effective data displays are labels, which help us understand the layers of information. Titles are also crucial. Without clear, effective labels and titles, it's hard for us to figure out what we're looking at. Okay, with the basic anatomy in mind, let's look at specific data displays and the considerations appropriate to each. When would you use a table? There are two instances when you would use a table to organize information. The first is to represent complex data in columns and rows, and that's when a table working as a data display. And that's how we're most used to seeing tables used. The second reason for using tables in a document is to create an underlying grid to arrange information. And the most familiar example of this is the periodic table. If we imagine what's underneath, we can see the rows that arrange the information and the columns that arrange the information, creating cells in which information is contained. Here's an example of a table providing information about the economic impact of the craft supply industry in Michigan. Imagine trying to absorb this information in paragraph format. It'd be almost impossible. This table allows us to easily scan across and down to absorb the overall information or to grab specific information we may need. Here's another example from a website. It's easy here to imagine the columns and rows creating the arrangement of this information. Another example from a government report. Again, imagine trying to interact with this data in paragraph format. Let's say your boyfriend, and by your I mean mine, and by boyfriend I mean ex-boyfriend, gets together with other grown adults to play role-playing games, and let's imagine he asks you to create character sheets for these games. It might not be so obvious that this page was made in Word and arranged in tables, but it's tables here that organize the information and make this sheet easy to use and to handwrite on. Here's a view of the document from Word which shows how the top chunk of information was set up in a table. Well, let's say you have a brain tumor, you have to have surgery. If the surgery goes well, it will take 3 to 4 hours. If it doesn't go well, it could take 10 to 12 hours. You don't want your family to get bored waiting around at the hospital, so you create a scavenger hunt for them. Items are broken down into 3 categories: 1-point items, 5-point items, and 10-point items. The tables here allow for the easy alignment of items and space for scavenger hunters to mark which items they found. A final example, which offers some big clues for one of your tasks for Module 2 this week, is this. You're on the committee organizing your 30th high school class reunion. You've been asked to create a front page and template for your reunion booklet. And here are some ways that show how you could put tables to use in this task. And another scenario. You work for the NYU office that invites and reviews applications for students to perform as the NYU mascot, the Bobcat. You need to create a clear, readable, carefully organized, usable form for applicants who will download the form, hand fill it out, and return it. Here's just one example of how tables can help you design such a form. Let's shift to charts and graphs. When would you use a pie chart? Pie charts are used exclusively to present pieces of a whole. That whole is always 100%. Here we see a set of charts from a government report. One represents youth age 10 to 24. The other represents adults 25 years or older. The slices of each chart add up to 100%. Another pie chart, this one showing us a breakdown of how a week-long survey was sent out, and a chart from the report on the survey, showing us the breakdown of respondents. Note here the labels, one of the really important aspects of data displays. The big N number is the total number of respondents, or the 100%. The little n numbers are the number of respondents by category, that is, student, faculty, staff, etc. On the chart, we can see the little n numbers and the percent of 100. Let's say hypothetically that someone asks you to estimate how you allocate hours of your day during one day, meaning 24 hours is the 100%. You might create something that looks like this, or you might hone in on a portion of a day. In this case, the big N is 15 hours rather than 24, and the author has clearly marked this for us. When would you use a bar or column chart? Bar charts are used to represent one data group or multiple data groups across, most typically, time. So here we see a bar chart from a Pew Research Center report on political video consumers compared across 2 dimensions, their political affiliation and election year. The second example is an information-rich page from the 2012 Target Corporation annual report. On the left side, we can see a set of relatively simple graphics and a percent breakdown of how they contributed to annual sales. Next to this, we see a set of bar charts. The items in solid red represent that year's, that is 2012, numbers. See them in context, that is, next to growth from 2008, 2009, 2010, and 2011. This chart is from a highway use study. Importantly, in the chart here, the designers differentiate between actual data shown in red and the current count as at the time of the report being written, shown in yellow. Another bar chart that shows the differentiation of information is this. The solid teal lines show us actual numbers of high schoolers who reported smoking. The light teal number, which is also offset by 2 hash marks and italics, shows the goal number. And here's another design of a bar chart. In Word, these are referred to as column charts, and this particular design is a stacked column. I won't be asking you to produce the next few types of data displays from Module 2 for this week, but I want to introduce them to you. Line graphs or line charts are used to plot interval data, as you can see in this example and this example. Scatter plots plot or map data points to help us visually identify trends, like this example and this example. Organizational charts are used to represent hierarchy. Here we see the organization of the U.S. Department of Justice and the exceptionally complex United Nations system. Data maps use maps to spatially contour data, as in this example. And in this example reviews an important convention. Typically, and especially on data maps, higher saturation or higher numbers are represented in darker colors. So here we see that the largest number of sales occurred in Colorado, Minnesota, and North Dakota. And another example where the highest numbers again appear in the darkest color. Pictographs can actually be any kind of data display where the data is presented in pictures. Here's an example and another example. So that's an overview of various types of graphics and data displays, which I hope helps to further anchor the principles we read about in Markel's chapter. In the next video, we'll talk about bad data displays.